Hello, welcome back to the new year, 2023. If I sound weird, it's because I'm chewing on a cough drop because I am a little bit of a sore throat, so I hope I'm not getting sick.
She did, in fact, get sick.
What better way to start the new year off than to talk about something that we all are terrified of? AI art.
Editing Savannah here to let you know while I'm putting this together, this is a very long video. So I suggest making yourself a cup of coffee or a drink or some tea or some snacks or something and turning this on while you're doing something else. Because I have a lot to say about this subject and there are a lot of points in this, so this is a long video. So yeah, FYI, just make yourself comfy. Okay, bye.
I wanted to discuss this because it's something that I find scary and interesting and exciting and a bunch of various feelings. If you don't know who I am, my name is Savannah Alexandra and I am a professional character designer and illustrator. I've worked on a bunch of shows, movies, and toys, including character designs for Archer, illustration for Archer. I did character designs on America the Motion Picture, which is on Netflix, and I've done a bunch of toy designs now. I work as a freelancer in the toy industry. I have worked on toys like Zombies and Cloudies and a bunch of other stuff that's under NDA, so I can't really talk about it. I am also an aspiring content creator. I post my art on Instagram and I sell my own work and I have my own characters and stories and everything. So as a professional artist who's been working in the industry and in various industries for 2016, 17, 17 to 18, 18 to 19, 20, 21, 21 to 22, 6 years? 6 years-ish. I feel like I have kind of an interesting take on this whole discussion, and I feel like the discussion has become very, very black or white. I feel like it's way more nuanced than that. And I wanted to talk about it, talk about the pros and cons, the things that I'm worried about, the things that I like, and the things that I feel like should be fixed. And I also want to show my experiments that I did along the way. What I ended up doing was getting access to Midjourney AI, which is an AI art program on Discord. And I decided I wanted to see what the hoopla was for myself and not go off of what I've been reading and everything. I wanted to experience it myself because there's one thing that I have always thought about. When I was in college, one of my professors who was a professor who worked at Disney, he was working at Disney when the whole switch from traditional hand-drawn animation to digitally drawn animation happened. And I'm not saying like digitally drawn as in like a computer was drawing it. It just meant that the animation program was now digital instead of doing it with pencil and paper. And he was there for that transition, and he remembered very distinctly that there were a bunch of artists who refused to learn the programs and were like, the computers are gonna take our jobs, I refuse, and they wouldn't learn any of the digital animation stuff. And they all lost their jobs because they refused to learn this program because they were scared of it. But as somebody who has done both hand-drawn animation and digital animation, and I've worked in 3D animation, and I've tried a bunch of different programs. I've tried Toon Boom, I've tried Flash, I've tried like all of these like different animation programs. It's just a tool, and it didn't remove the skill set from animation. And in fact, if you just let the program automate on its own and animate on its own, it looked like garbage. So you really did need a human component to it to animate. And I've worked in these programs and you can full on draw frame by frame just like you would with paper and pencil. So it just kind of streamlined some things and made some things easier for the modern artist. And the ones who refused to learn this program, they just kind of got left behind because of stubbornness, kind of. And I'm not saying that they can't enjoy or prefer doing paper pencil animation, but I think there's a difference between that and refusing to learn it because you have some preconceived notions on it. So you're like, I refuse to learn, as opposed to being like, yeah, I tried it. It's not my favorite. I'm going to try to just do hand-drawn animation. So my teacher always told us to not be scared of new technology usually, because it can be a tool for artists. So with this whole AI discussion, I was trying really hard not to be reactionary to it, especially in the art community. There's a very strong reaction to it, understandably so and reasonably so. And I'm not saying that people are being dramatic or overreacting, because I think some of the issues people have brought up are fair and valid, and some of the fears people have are fair and valid. But I did want to go into this and try it out. I wanted to see how threatening it actually was, and how artists could potentially use it to our benefit, and also the issues that I had with it and the issues that have been brought up that I found were not issues when I was messing with it. So this is very much kind of an all over pros and cons thing, and I'll give my synopsis of how I feel about AI at the end, but I wanted to start this off with, I joined the Midjourney AI Discord and I signed up for the free trial, so I never gave them any money. I did two types of tests. The first one was I gave it prompts that I was looking for already for an idea that I had. I wasn't looking for a direct illustration. I wasn't trying to create the illustration that I had in my head. What I was trying to create was solid reference pieces that I could then use as inspiration to work on my own piece. The second test I did was trying to replicate my own work and my own style without me giving my own work to the bot or whatever. I wanted to see if I could get it to get close to how I draw, based off of prompts or things I would consider inspirational to me, or things that inspired my own style. I found various success with both of these. I want to also show you the images that Midjourney compiled for me as what I'm gonna call my reference images. And then I will also show you later on the images that Midjourney tried to make of my own work. I tried to get it to replicate Gigi from the Puppets, which is one of my own characters. It did not do very well at that one. But let's talk about the first one. I'm gonna show you the reference images that I got. I'm gonna tell you the prompts that I put in. And then I'm gonna show you how I used that to my own benefit to create a new piece of artwork.
So let's just jump right into it. I apologize for my voice. I have a cold, like I predicted earlier in this video. So when you get into Midjourney, you get put into like a newbie channel, quote unquote, and in there you type in or /imagine, and that will start the prompt. And from there you type in literally whatever you want. I found through trial and error that the more descriptive, the better the image turns out. And I'm talking like as descriptive as possible, to the point of like things that you'd think are common sense but aren't. For example, later on in this, I was trying to find prompts for like retro futuristic fashion show where you have a model walking down a runway, and I had to specify model walking down catwalk, front facing, walking towards camera, full body, like describe every single detail. And so I found in that way it was kind of clunky, because the AI is just a program and it doesn't understand like the context clues that come with something like, oh yeah, a runway model, because I think most people would know if you said, oh, let's design an image of a runway model walking down a runway, you would kind of know what they were talking about. But I found in the early iterations where I was just saying model walking down a runway, it was just giving me someone walking on like a sidewalk or something. But while this recording goes through and shows you in real time what using the app was like and what type of iterations you'd see me get on top of maybe like what other people were putting in, I do want to start off by talking about the cons I see with Midjourney that I feel like are very valid and concerning reasons for people to be upset. The first one that I think is definitely a big fear, and understandably so, is the fact that a lot of artists are afraid that it's going to take their jobs. The reason for this is because AI bros, I guess, like the people who are like super pro AI, I'm just going to call them AI bros in this to make it easier to distinguish. AI bros are, in the communities that I've looked in, kind of have a mocking tone towards artists who have been scared about this, as if like, oh, you guys are just scared because we're on your same level now, or oh, you're scared because you're not gatekeeping it anymore, which is not the case. A lot of artists, especially professional artists, have a genuine fear of this because artists have been fighting to get their job taken seriously for forever, essentially. Art is one of those careers that just really isn't taken seriously. It is consistently underpaid. It's consistently undervalued. It's often outsourced. So a lot of people who are trying to make a living, especially now in this like hustle culture and like internet world, content creation, people who are trying to now make a living off of their own work all of a sudden feel rightfully threatened by this because they've started paying their bills with this job, and now all of a sudden something's out there acting like it can do the same thing. So I think it's very valid for people to be concerned and scared, especially when you feel like your job is on the line and the thing that's been paying your bills for however many years is on the line, and you have to kind of rethink your whole entire living structure. Artists also are constantly fighting against outsourcing in general. We have to deal with a lot of outsourcing issues. Even when I was working in animation studios, they would outsource a lot to studios overseas where they could do it cheaper. The frustrating thing with that a lot of the times is they would send it out and have it done cheaper, quote unquote, but then when we would get the files back, they were all messed up. Hierarchies were wrong, layers were wrong, whatever, like everything was all wacky. And so you'd have to go back in and retroactively fix stuff and change things. And so it ended up being more work than anything, which was so frustrating. And then on top of it, like I mentioned, there are people who make a living now, specifically in content creation, on commissions. Like their job is commissions, whether that's pet portraits or human portraits or child portraits or whatever it is. I know people who their whole job is drawing people's pets, and they've been doing that for years and years, and now all of a sudden a program can just take your pet and turn it into any style, really, and voila, that person's out of a job, essentially, which is really, really frustrating. Another thing artists will have to deal with, too, is this constant, well, why are your prices so high when I can put it into an AI program and get something comparable for like $6? Or we've dealt with this type of attitude forever, especially now with outsourcing and the internet. People go, well, why should I pay you $100 when I can get it from somebody who's gonna charge me $20? So there's a constant defense on getting paid what you're worth for your work and trying not to overcharge people, but also trying to be able to pay your bills and make a living off of your stuff. So it's understandable, very, very understandable to see people scared and nervous and frustrated, especially with some things coming out, at least now in January 2023, where some people are starting to get turned away and replaced with AI art. I have an example here that I can show you, but it's very frustrating to see. Another really big issue is the fact that the way that these AI programs populate their databases, they are essentially taking art and photos and images from various artists around the internet and using it as what they're pulling from. And a lot of AI bros will argue, oh, it's just stealing like an artist, which is, yes, is a phrase. The phrase stealing like an artist means taking inspiration in little bits and pieces from various artists and stuff from around the world, or from whatever inspires you, essentially, to create your own style. But this isn't really exactly the same thing. The problem is stealing like an artist comes down to getting inspired from various work that exists already and then turning it into your own style. Which means that as you continue working forward on building your own style, it's going to change and take shape into a completely brand new thing. Something that, while may be indicative of some existing stylistic choices from other artists, it is essentially its own thing at the end. And on top of it, you can ask any artist anywhere who their sources of inspiration are, and they'll tell you right out the gate. For me, I can tell you right away, there's Tex Avery, there's Chuck Jones, there's Studio Ghibli, there's 1950s and 60s illustrations and advertisements from that time. George Petty, who's a famous pinup artist. I can rattle off a whole bunch of people who have inspired my work. Now, the problem with these AI programs is it doesn't tell you where it's drawing its quote-unquote inspiration. I use as a very loose term. It's not telling you what it's drawing from and which database it's drawing from. So you really have no idea what it's referencing. And then on top of it, a lot of these people haven't opted in to be in the database. So I think it is generally unfair to store a bunch of artists' work in a database and then use it to make money off of, essentially. Even if it ends up transforming the work into something else, I think that it's still unfair. And when you're working in a professional setting, you have to be very careful on what you're using as reference, and you have to make sure it's not too similar to the thing that you're referencing. And a lot of the times you have to make sure that you're using maybe copyright-free things or things that you have permission to use, otherwise it could get you into legal trouble. So the fact that these AI programs are just kind of storing their database full of art and images that you have no idea what the copyrights are on them or anything like that, it can kind of become a gray area in a legal sense. And it's definitely upsetting to see artists that I personally know or personally really, really look up to and follow to be posting that they have found proof that their work is being used in these databases and used to train AI without getting any sort of consent or royalties or anything from it. I have examples of real life photographer friends whose work has been used, artists on Instagram whose work has been used, and it is kind of like a slap in the face to search up in something like, there's a website called Have I Been Trained, which tells you if AI databases are using your work. And I think Loish says it best in her AI post where she says, "I wholeheartedly support the ongoing protest against AI art. Why? Because my artwork is included in the datasets used to train these image generators without my consent. I get zero compensation for the use of my art, even though these image generators cost money to use and are a commercial product. Musicians are not being treated the same way. Stability has a music generator that only uses royalty-free music in their dataset. Their words. Because diffusion models are prone to memorization and overfitting, releasing a model trained on copyrighted data could potentially result in legal issues. Why is the work of visual artists being treated differently? Many have compared image generators to human artists seeking out inspiration, i.e., steal like an artist. Those two are not the same. My art is literally being fed into these generators through the datasets and spat back out of a program that has no inherent sense of what is respectful to artists. And as long as my art is literally integrated into the system used to create the images, it is a commercial use of my art without my consent. Until there is an ethically sourced database that compensates artists for the use of their images, I am against AI art. I also think platforms should do everything they can to prevent scraping of their content for these databases. Artists speak out against this predatory practice. Our art should not be exploited without our consent, and we deserve to be compensated when our art is exploited for commercial use." Now, with these very important things stated, let's move into the final examples I got for reference images, as well as talking about the pros of Midjourney and other AI art usages for artists. that I really liked about Midjourney and working in an AI program like this was that I found it was really great for the preliminary stages of coming up with an idea, like almost treating it as a mood board. So putting in the prompt of something that you are looking for and seeing kind of what it dredges up, and then taking a ton of those images and going from there to create your own image. I thought that was very beneficial actually, and it was cool to see these like conceptualized images of retro futuristic fashion that actually didn't exist at that time, but kind of made it look like it did, and it was very inspiring for me. I feel like I took bits and pieces of these outfits to build the outfit that I made in the end. I also liked the color palette that the AI was giving me with my preliminary beginning prompts. It had a lot of these like pink, green, teal colors, which I'm a sucker for pink and teal, so I really enjoyed that, and I tried to incorporate those colors into my final piece. I also feel like this could be beneficial for people with disabilities who might not actually be able to use their hands to draw for whatever reason, or for people who have a hard time mentally visualizing things. There are people out there who cannot mentally visualize what they're trying to illustrate, so sometimes it helps having like a jumping off point for them. Another really beneficial thing is, after I started getting a hang of these prompts, I started really playing around with body types and ethnicities and everything, and it was really cool to kind of see different faces that you normally wouldn't see in photos and ads from like the 50s and 60s, but in kind of that style, which I thought was really cool. So there is something cool about the representation that you can get from it as well. Another thing that I, along with a lot of other artists, were worried about was how this would replace our jobs. And at least currently, right now, I found that it was very clunky, and I was a little relieved when I was working with it, because after putting in a bunch of prompts, I realized pretty quickly that, yeah, this really isn't going to replace that much, because first of all, the images they give you are just flat JPEG images. You can't really go in and edit them. So as a professional artist who has worked with a bunch of various companies, there is one thing that is common across animation, video games, illustration, toy design, all of it. The client wants edits. They will always want edits. They will always want things lightened, darkened, moved around, characters move to the left a little bit, characters move to the right a little bit, things bigger, things smaller. It will be edited over and over and over again, and there's a lot of versions that you're doing of the same image over and over again that can get very specific. And I mean, like, move the character over like 4 pixels, or like change the hair color just slightly. Think like small details. And it's, at least right now, basically impossible to get it that precise when you're working, getting the AI to understand that pinpoint precision, because it is just a computer after all, so it really doesn't know what you mean when you say move the character over 4 pixels or make the hair a little bit lighter. Like, it doesn't understand that. I watched a lot of people in the channels trying to get variations on their prompts. What I found was really interesting was that I would read the prompt as an artist, and I immediately knew the direction that they were looking for, but they were really struggling with Midjourney really comprehending what they were trying to say. For example, one of them was this prompt of a weird boy who is going fishing with an old man. And from the prompt I was gathering, it seemed like the boy was kind of an outcast, and he found friendship in this old man who was teaching him how to fish. So it's supposed to be kind of like a heartwarming thing. But the AI kept interpreting things kind of weird. It kept kind of making the characters look very generic, and then sometimes it would make like the child really tiny and the old man like really big, or like the fishes really gigantic, or just like the scale was always off, or the positioning was weird. There was just things that were off when I feel like, as an artist, I read the prompt and immediately knew what they were looking for. Now, mind you, they could give me some of those preliminary images from Midjourney as a jumping off point and say like, this was kind of the vibe I was going for, but I really didn't get exactly what I wanted, so I want you to take this and like turn it into something professional. And in that way I would understand using it, and also it kind of helps bridge that like client artist gap. But it was interesting watching the computer program struggle with things that I felt like as an artist I really easily understood. Another thing I was really surprised about, which I will also touch upon in my attempts of getting it to replicate Gigi the puppet, is it really did not do a good job at replicating pre-existing styles. I saw a lot of people trying to get their images to look like a certain artist's work or something more generic like Disney or Pixar or something, and it really struggled with stylized cartoony images. I feel like the area where Midjourney and these AI programs excel in are ones that have more realistic imaging, so more like photorealism, because I feel like it probably has a easier time pulling images from their database for that, and it's not as varied as like stylistic illustrations are. So even when I was trying to get it to do things in like a Disney style, it really wasn't getting it. And then another point towards it not being an issue for artists, and this point is a little mean, but you can't really account for taste. So for example, I felt like a lot of the work I was seeing was very derivative. Like it kind of reminded me of the same type of like fantasy dragon multicolored art that you would see in like every gift shop type thing, where I feel like I wouldn't be able to tell what image is pulling from where, who's what, like it all just looks the same. And I noticed that pretty quickly that a lot of these AI images have like a very similar vibe to them, and whether that's just the limitation of the program or the people who are putting in the prompts, they just, I don't know, some of the stuff I was seeing was like, this image looks boring. I don't know how you did it, but it still looks boring. So I feel like you can't really account for taste, even if you have all of the tools in the world. I still saw people in there doing like AI versions of your middle school eye drawing, where you would draw like an eye in a sketchbook. I kept seeing stuff like that and like just variations on selfies, and yeah, that was about it for the most part. I touched upon this earlier, but the big limitation I found was that the program really can't fully understand what you're asking it. So while it can pull out references of human anatomy and colors and textures and stuff, it doesn't understand it at its core, which is why you see it mess up on hands so much, because the hand itself is a very complex thing and it can take a variety of shapes and poses, and it's so malleable, but there is structure underneath. It's made up of bones and muscles. And an artist can render a hand because they learn what's going on underneath, how all of those work together, and then how to interpret that into an illustration. Meanwhile, the computer is really just referencing it as just random shapes, and it doesn't really understand the hand at its core and what the hand does and how it functions, which is why you see so many issues with how it renders it, which is also why a lot of beginning artists have a hard time with hands as well. It's because the beginner artist and the AI program do not understand at its core how the hand functions. Once you understand how the hand functions, then you can draw a hand, but the program does not understand that. Now, before I show you the finalized image, I want to show you the attempts at trying to get Midjourney to create Gigi. Gigi is one of the characters from my own concept called the Puppets, and the Puppets are a ragtag group of mid-century showgirls who are also based off of different types of dog breeds. Their style is inspired a lot by old vintage illustrations and character designers such as Tex Avery, and just like the general 1950s, 1960s vibes. And so I really tried hard to get Midjourney to create something similar without feeding it my work, but if I could just write in the correct prompt, if I could get something similar, and oh boy, the results were not good. I'm gonna leave in my prompts as well so you can see everything that I wrote to try to get the result. And even when I wrote in things like Disney or Tex Avery or Chuck Jones, I don't know if any of these really look like any of those things, so... Yeah, these are probably the closest, but good luck trying to get it to replicate this over and over, because oh boy. Now let's jump into finishing my illustration, and I will touch upon my last point, which is how I think that these programmers could make AI more ethical. There's no doubt that there's a giant divide right now between artists and pro AI users. I think one of the first things that we could do that would help mend this a little bit is to come up with a whole new term for it instead of calling it AI art. Some folks have suggested calling it synthography, which I personally am fully behind, because I think it helps ease the tension and feel like artists aren't being replaced, and it's just a new medium and a new tool to use as opposed to a complete replacement. Another super important discussion that I've seen that I totally agree with is that artists should be allowed to opt in or out of the stockpile database that these AI programs are using. And I think an incentive for having artists be in the database is that they get royalties every time their images are referenced. I think that that is only fair, and I know that there are other industries out there that do something similar, such as the music industry when other artists' work gets sampled. That way it allows for there to be high quality images and stuff in this database, but artists feel like they're not being used or taken advantage of. Also, I feel like this one should be apparent, but there shouldn't be any AI programs being created to completely replicate a pre-existing artist's work, especially an artist who is currently living. I have seen now a few instances of somebody building an AI program that references an artist's work and to create work that looks similar to theirs, which I think is extremely unethical, and that would even just go, even if there was an artist who was drawing it, it would just be copying, and that's an issue, and there's copyright laws with that type of stuff in general, so this should go without saying, but there should be no programs that replicate an artist's work completely. Overall, I can see the pros and cons behind what I'm going to start calling synthography. I feel like once we start adopting that term as well, if everyone starts referring to it as synthography, it will help ease this issue. And I think currently, at least now in January 2023, obviously there is a big chance that AI can improve, get better, get worse at stealing from artists, or can get better. And I feel like if we address this issue now and talk about the ways that we can solve these problems that can work with artists instead of against artists, we can pave the way to make synthography just another tool instead of something as a replacement. While I find I really enjoy using synthography as a mood board builder, something I can jump off from, especially since a lot of my work is reimagining things from the 50s and 60s, I still don't feel fully comfortable using it currently since these issues that I brought up have not yet been addressed. If these issues do get addressed, then I might actually end up using it in my workflow in the future as sort of my preliminary starting point. But yeah, that's about it for everything that I feel on this topic. Obviously, this isn't like a hard or fast rule or way that I feel on this. My opinions are definitely prone to change. The longer synthography is out and doing things, and, you know, depending on the direction it goes, I might end up being completely 100% against it, or I might end up being super for it. It really depends on the direction that synthography goes in. I personally, like I said, won't be using it right now since there's still weird ethics behind it, and I don't agree with artists' work being used for free, essentially. But other than that, currently, this is how I feel, and it was definitely an interesting experiment to do. And I guess with all of that said, let's look at the final image. So that's about it. I would love to hear your opinions on this. I am totally willing to open a conversation and discuss your concerns and other things in the comments below. If you think I'm super off base, let me know. And I want to just see what all of you guys have to say. What are your concerns? What, if you've tried it, what do you like about it? And how do you think we could move forward to make this something that's not threatening and actually a tool for artists instead of something scary? Let me know. Bye-bye.